much for agreeing to join me today and chat.
No worries at all.
Would you mind, just to start things off, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Are you filming now or?
Yeah, I'm recording.
Oh, it's recording. Okay, fantastic. So my name's Lydia Moore. I also go by I would say pen name, but it's kind of an internet pen name, the real Lydia Moo. And that's what I write kind of on my WordPress and on my Twitter and on my Instagram under. As a writer, I would say I am fairly new to kind of writing. I'm not going to say full time because I don't write full time, but I'm fairly new to kind of writing again. I wrote a lot when I was a lot younger, so kind of a kid. Um, and then just recently, really, kind of beginning of this year, I started writing again, and it's mainly kind of poetry, flash fiction, short stories, that sort of thing that I'm writing at the moment.
I read your poem, what was it, Easter eggs?
Yeah.
I really liked that one. That was good.
Thank you.
It told
Thank
a
you.
story, but it did it poetically, and I don't know. I would encourage people. I'll put a link to it in the description.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, Easter eggs was a topical one because it's obviously Easter. But themes vary, to be honest. It's just what kind of comes into my head. Sometimes there'll be something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I think I absolutely need to get that down. Other times I'll just think, oh, what's going on at the moment? And I'll write something to do with that. So it kind of varies, really.
So you said that you have gotten back into writing after taking a bit of a sabbatical, after a bit of a break. Do you remember like when you first started to write as a child? Or I'm guessing it was a child or a teenager or
Yeah, no, I was really young actually. So my mum was always a storyteller. She'd always
oh
tell us stories
really?
that she'd written
Yeah.
herself. Although it's only been recently that she's actually started to try and kind of get them down. I think they were always kind of in her head. And I was always kind of really into writing. I found it a really kind of a lot easier of a way to express myself. I was quite a shy child. I'm a lot less shy now, but I was very reserved as a child. So yeah, I started writing really early. I remember writing. I'm going to say a book. It was a kid's book, and it was literally, when you fold your pages over, and you've got, and it was about a lion, and I can't remember. It was something to do with a lion making friends with a mouse. I think I was only about 4 or 5 or
Well, there
something.
you go. That's tension, drama, danger,
Yeah.
the unlikely friendship. That's great.
Yeah, so yeah, from an early age really, and then
Do
I
you
kind
remember
of.
how old you were? I know it's difficult when I think about my early memories. I mean, they don't come tagged with the, oh yeah, you were 2.5, you know. But can you remember like about how old you were?
I probably would have been 4 or 5, I think. I was very young. And
Mhm.
most of, I think, the bits I remember from it are things that my mum has told me since, and she's still got the book, bless her.
Oh,
So,
so
so
you said your
yeah,
mom was a storyteller. So did she tell you stories at bedtime or?
yeah, she loved kind of making stories up. As I say, she's only just recently started kind of writing them down, and she's really good with drawing as well. I'm absolutely hopeless at drawing, and if you have a look at some
Oh,
of my
me too.
poems, I try and do illustrations, and it's just hilarious.
I started to
Um,
watch YouTube videos to try to get a little bit better, but I'm not going to say how it's going.
I mean, there's something for me about kind of developing your own drawing style. And, I read, so I don't know if you've heard of Ali Brush,
No,
does hyperbole and a half.
no.
I think she's from Canada. I
Okay.
think she is, but she's absolutely fantastic, and she does kind of a combination of writing and cartoons, and they are terribly drawn cartoons. And I'm sure
Oh
she
no,
wouldn't
no, I
mind
think I
anyone saying
have. Yeah,
that.
no, I think I know what you're talking about. Yes, yes. I
Yes,
horrible with
yes.
names.
Yes. So I kind of, I'm trying to lead into that. Well, maybe if
Yeah.
I can't draw, it'll be good that I can't draw. But yeah, so yeah, she was a big storyteller, my mum, and I think, to be honest, as I've gotten older, I can tell that she used storytelling to kind of give us messages that she wanted us to know about
Mm,
growing up. So kind of, how you do like morals and things that are
right,
important and
right.
things. Yeah. So I guess, and I've always really looked up to my mum. So I kind of just thought, well, I want to do that as well.
Nice. Do you remember when you started to read?
Yeah. So again, I was fairly young. I think I was only 2 or 3. And the only reason that I got into reading is because I had an older brother and he was learning to read at the time. And I was insanely jealous of anyone spending time with my mum that wasn't me. So when she was spending time with him, trying to teach him to read, I'd be like, no, 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 I want to play this game too. I want to play this game too. And he
Oh,
wasn't all that interested, but what it meant was I picked it up quite early. And I remember always kind of loving that as well. And I think that kind of played into the fact that I was quite a reserved, quite a shy child,
mm,
and it's that kind of typical um, turning to books
mhm.
for that kind of stimulation where I found it quite difficult social interactions and that sort of thing at that age, whereas yeah, I was usually lost in a book from an early age.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I've met actually, well, at least one other person who learned how to read like very young, and
Mm-hmm.
we were both really bad spellers.
Really?
I don't know. Her theory was that this had something to do with it because we were used to sounding out words. Like so,
Okay.
we just, as long as we get the gist, it's fine. We're moving on.
Maybe that's it. It's kind of, yeah, because it's not really a big deal these days either, is it? Because you've got
No,
kind of doing everything on computers, it does it all for
exactly.
you. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think
Exactly.
my
That's what
spelling
I
has
said.
got worse as I've gotten older because I do rely on like autocorrect and
Oh
things.
yeah,
And yeah,
that
yeah.
saves me from so many things. Um, so what are your writing goals right now? What are you working on?
What am I working on? So when I kind of picked writing back up again, and it's been one of those things that as an angsty teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry and I've read that back recently and, cringed a hell of a lot. There's some bits I can take from it. There's some bits that I will never ever see the light of day. But when I was doing that and I've kind of poured my heart and soul into it, and I always thought that I wanted to be a poet. And then I started writing again, as I say, in the last few months, really. I've done bits and bobs in between. And I started with kind of flash fiction. So
Mhm.
you've got your kind of 100 words, 200 word stories. And I found that it was helpful to get me back into it because I don't know if it's something about me, but if I sit down and say, right, okay, now I'm going to write a novel, that's immense, isn't it? It's like,
Yes, it's
okay.
short stories. I would say, a short, like flash fiction, then a short
Yes.
story, then a novella, then,
Yes. Yeah, you gradually work your way up. So yeah, so I kind of started doing that and then I naturally fell back into poems.
mm,
So I'm doing a lot of those at the moment. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I always thought, if I got back into writing, my first goal would be to, get formally published.
mm.
But I've had a lot of conversations with people. I've done a lot of kind of looking around. There's a lot on social media these days. And I think the routes to kind of getting yourself out there, getting your name out there, getting your writing out there, they're far more diverse than they maybe would have been, when I was thinking about it back when I was 15, 16.
Yeah.
So I guess at the moment, my writing goals is just to kind of get as much of my writing out there as possible,
Mhm.
get people reading it, get people talking about it, work out what people like and what goes down well, and then kind of build a bit of a basis from that. But if you ask me, because in my corporate career, people are always saying, "Oh, what's your 5 year plan? What's your 10 year plan?" I don't have anything as set in stone as that, but I just know that writing makes me really happy and it makes me feel kind of really fulfilled. So I'm just
That's the
going to
best
carry on
reason
doing
in the
that.
world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So I'm curious, like, do you send your stuff off to magazines at all? Like you, I guess, like you said you were writing flash fiction. Have you ever thought about sending it off to like a old-fashioned print magazine or submitting it to like an online magazine?
So I have submitted a few pieces.
Okay.
It's quite, I don't know if you've done it yourself, but it's kind of an arduous process.
It
And
is.
people always say, for 200 you submit, you might get one acceptance.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it is something I'm kind of doing in the background. One of the obstacles for me is that, and I don't know if other people find this, but quite a lot of the time, if you submit something, they say, well, you can't submit it anywhere else and you can't publish it online, even on your own
Right.
site.
Right.
And I find that fairly difficult because if it was a quick turnaround, that would be fine. But obviously, that they're often kind of volunteers editing these magazines. So it takes a few months,
Hmm.
sometimes six
Hmm.
months for them to read things and get back to you. So it's kind of tricky because you're not able to get things out there as quickly
Right.
as you would want to.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what I try and do is kind of hold a few pieces back and think, right, okay, I'm going to submit that, and and I can wait the 6 months to find out if they want to publish it. But at the same time, I also think there's quite a lot of value in kind of having your own kind of pages. So I've got my WordPress site, having your own Instagram, having your own, Twitter and things that you can use as your own personal platform.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think at the moment, what I'm trying to do is a combination of both. Um, and I think there's something as well for me about when you're writing, I don't think anyone, some people may say, oh, I only write for me. But ultimately, if one day at some point want to build a career out of it, you need to have in the back of your mind that you're not just writing for you. You need to write things that other people want to read.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's a bit of a fallacy. But I also think that there's kind of an in between. And I think for
Right.
me, putting things out there, on WordPress and things is my in between. It's like, yes, I'm building to something, um, but right now I'm doing it on my own terms.
Hmm. Hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I mean, like when you were talking, one thing that I thought of, have you read Stephen King's memoir on writing?
I have it and I haven't read it yet. It's on my big long list of things to read, but yes.
It's really, I mean, if in the first part it's autobiography, and so what I did when I approached the book the first time is I actually started reading his advice on writing, which begins about halfway through, and then I read that, and then I went back and I read the whole thing through again, um, which actually worked out not too badly for me because it makes you even more interested in his autobiography because you've just read what he has to say about writing. But one thing that he says is when he sits down and he writes the first draft, he's writing the first draft just for him. And then
Mhm.
when he does the second draft, he's writing it for the world. So he
Okay.
writes the first draft with the door closed and the second draft with the door open, type of thing. That's his analogy. And yeah, I mean, like, because I think that ultimately, like, when we do that first draft, I'd call it a vomit draft. I know that, well, it's colorful, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
you're just you can't write down something that's not inside of you to a certain extent,
Yes.
so it
I,
has to
I
be
would
for you.
I would completely agree with that. And I think there's something as well where you can tell if you're reading a writer's first draft. And again, this is kind of more looking at things, on social media or on the internet, because I think you can tell that it's all that kind of raw emotion and maybe not the polish around
Hmm.
it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I
Right.
think if you're putting that out there, it's got to be an intentional thing,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
because that's highly personal. Once you've polished it up a bit and kind of smoothed the edges, it almost feels like it's safer to put it out there then, doesn't it?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And I mean, this was another thing that I wanted to ask you about is how do you like? This is something I have trouble with. How do you make that call? You've written something and you read it and it's like, okay, maybe you give it to a couple of your friends to read, but they're your friends, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do you make that call that, okay, I'm going to send this out now?
How do I make that call? I'm fairly quick at the moment because I
Hmm.
know what I'm like, and if I overanalyze, I overanalyze in a lot of things in my life, and if I let myself do that, nothing would ever go out. So there's an
Okay.
element of try not to overthink it for me, which is a lot easier when you're talking about short pieces,
Right.
short
Right.
prose, short poetry, and things. Um, so I think there's an element of that. I think my kind of my criteria for putting something out there, I always think if this was the only piece that anyone ever read of mine, one, would I be happy with that? And two, would I think that they would want to read more?
Hmm.
Because again, thinking about it from a social media or an internet, or kind of the culture of today, where you can get things in snapshots. What my worst fear, not my worst fear, but my worst fear from a writing perspective would be that someone would read a piece that I put out there that I wasn't that proud of, and then think, oh no, I won't read any more of that. So I kind of look at each piece, try and look at each piece in isolation and go, am I proud enough? It might not be my best piece, but am I happy that if someone read that, they would get a good idea of what I'm about and think, yeah, I'll read a few more of those.
Hmm. I like that. That's good criteria. Okay, I'm stealing those. um, oh, that's good. Okay, so have you thought about using like how do you decide where you're going to submit to? Like there's a site I sometimes use, which is the submission grinder.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but do you go through the writer's market? Do you, because of that huge, book that could, crush small animals? How do you decide where to submit?
I don't think I'm as scientific as that, to be honest.
Okay.
I tend to, if I've written a piece, I tend to think, well, not necessarily the subject matter, maybe the subject matter, but also kind of what is the style of this piece.
Mm,
And I'll have a little bit of a look around, have a look at what other things that have been published in journals, and think, okay, I'll submit it to that one, and see if they're interested in it. As I say, it might be something that I do more in the future,
mhm.
submitting to journals, but right now I'm kind of more focusing on building up my own kind of Instagram, my own WordPress site, and building a presence in that way. I will probably reach a point where I hit a wall with that, and I'm
Mhm.
aware of that, and I need to kind of be more strategic with getting my name out there. But I'm kind of just enjoying exploring the different routes at the moment.
Right, right. That, I mean, which is great, which is um, really good. So if you, I get the feeling that you're kind of feeling around the different genre, and you might not want to classify yourself as, oh yes, I like horror. I like, because I was reading some of your stuff, and it seems to be like you're a lot of humor there. There is some horror. There, it could be like sci-fi or just like,
Mm-hmm.
are you attracted to one particular genre to write in or to read in? What do you like to read? Do you find that what you write sort of reflects what you're reading right now?
I mean, Stephen King is, I've got to say, of all time, my favorite writer. And I know that's
Oh,
really
good.
cliched, and a lot of people would say that, but I love Stephen King.
Yeah, me too.
On the kind of one end of the spectrum, I just find him really easy to read from a
Mhm.
perspective of the way that he writes. I like horror, but he
Mm.
also writes in a way that really draws you in. I think, he
Yes.
writes
Oh,
characters
definitely.
very well.
Yes.
Yeah. So you kind of, you're going along with them and you're feeling the story. And one thing that really turns me off when I'm reading a book is if I don't care about the characters. So
Mhm.
I recently read a book where I just I could not connect with the characters in any way, shape, or form. And that might have just been me, rather than anything on the writer's part. But I
Yeah, not
just
every
found myself,
writer.
yeah, I found it really difficult because I kind of, in the harshest possible way, I kind of thought, well, I don't really care what happens to this character, so I'm not really invested in the book, you know. So, I mean, I don't want bad things to
I've been
happen to
there.
him
I've been there.
objectively,
I know
but
what you mean.
yeah. Um,
And then you feel
so,
horrible, and the question is, okay, am I going to be a completist and wade through this, or am I going to cut my
mm,
losses, right?
and I did, and I finished it, and I was so angry.
Well,
I was
I
like,
mean,
oh,
I think that as writers, maybe we get something out of that, like
mm,
maybe, in terms of the craft, because I think it pays to read things that aren't all that good or that aren't to your taste, and sort of read around so you have more of a feeling for the variety that's out there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a little bit like some advice actually I got in my kind of my full-time job. That, sometimes it's helpful to work with someone that's difficult or have a boss that's difficult because it shows you what not to do. And I suppose that's the same with books. It's like, oh, if I wrote, then I wouldn't do X, X, and X because I don't think it particularly works. But yeah, so I do read horror. I read a lot of horror. I find it the best form of kind of escapism.
Yeah.
So for me, I would find it difficult to read something. So, like a lot of people like kind of romance and that sort of thing, or stuff that's kind of really akin to real life. But I find when I'm reading something like that, I link it too much back to my own experiences. So it's not enough of an escape for me. Whereas if I can read about someone being chased by zombies, I mean, I've never been chased by zombies.
Right. It's more
I
like
cannot relate.
therapy than just,
Yeah,
entertainment.
exactly. And then when I write, I suppose what I try and do is I try and balance a bit of kind of what I would want to read, i.e., the horror type stuff, with a little bit of humor as well, because I think there's a lot of writing out there that takes itself terribly seriously. And I think that's absolutely fine. And some people do it absolutely beautifully, so that's not a criticism. But I can't do that myself. I find it very hard to take myself that seriously. So when I write, even sometimes when I'm trying to write something that's you know, really, really deep, it's usually tinged with a twist of, but there's humor in this because
I think
yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's one reason why Stephen King is so popular because, I mean, usually there's something darkly humorous about
Mm,
his stories.
yeah, yeah, I would agree with that actually. Yeah, yeah. And as well, if someone reads a piece of my work again, I really want to feel like they're getting a bit of a snapshot of me. And in real life, so to speak, such a weird term, but I am exactly like that. I have a very dark sense of humor, but the humor is always there. So I suppose I just can't get away from that with my writing.
I would encourage you to run toward that. That's good. When you were a kid and you were writing, and did you ever try to share your stories with other people? Or was it something that you did largely for yourself, or you don't remember?
Mixture.
Hmm.
I'd write things down and share them with my mum. Um, my mum
Me
thinks
too.
everything I do is wonderful because your mum does, doesn't
Yeah.
she? So I always
It's
got
in the
high
job
praise from her.
description.
Yeah. And then I was, as I kind of went through school, I shared some of my stuff, that I did it, I wrote in English class and things. And people were always like, "Oh, it's very good," but that was always from very advanced years in terms of vocabulary and that sort of thing, and poetic styles and things. So it was always a reflection of, from an academic perspective, that is a good piece of writing. I think what's been interesting this time round, and the last few months when I've been writing, is I feel, and I was quite nervous about putting things out there for this reason, but I feel like this time round, you get a lot more of the essence of me. So I'm not hiding behind, ridiculous vocabulary or, trying to be clever with some style or something. I'm literally just putting stuff on a page. And yes, I am editing it, but I feel like it's kind of it's more simple. And I feel
Mhm.
like it's more of a reflection of me. So I think while before, it almost sometimes felt like I was writing to show off, now it's very much I'm writing because I need to write,
Mhm.
and that's what I feel passionate about.
Wow, that's really good. I mean, that's actually some of Stephen King's advice too from on writing.
Oh,
Like, yeah,
really?
don't. I think Twain also said something like that. But yeah, just use as simple words that communicate your meaning and
Yeah.
avoid adverbs. Adverbs are not your friend.
But you want it to be accessible though, don't you? You know.
Yeah, I mean, like that's another thing that Stephen King said. If I remember, this is going to be a paraphrase, but he said that sometimes he worries that the reader won't grasp the thought that he's trying to express from the sentence, and then that's when he's tempted to include an adverb because it would make it clearer.
Mm,
But his thing, and a lot of other people, like, it's use strong verbs and communicate what is happening in the scene by the paragraph, by what's
yes.
happening around there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like I remember after I read this isn't going to recommend the book to you, but after I read on writing, I almost couldn't write. I was like, oh no, adverb, adverb, and I was just seeing all of this stuff, and I was like, oh, and then adjectives is like then I had to try to trim down on my adjectives, but I think overall it made my writing better than it was. So
I found a really good activity to help with that is again the kind of the flash fiction thing. If you write a short story and then say, right, if I had to get this down to 200 words, what would I strip out? If I had to get this down to 100 words and see how small you can go before it just completely loses all meaning.
No, that's good. Yeah, I mean that's one reason why I mean I haven't written a lot of flash fiction, but that's one reason why I kind of do like writing those short stories because it imposes a discipline.
Yeah.
Have you ever done the hashtag, I think it's like VVS 365 on some people like every day, or I mean it doesn't have to be every day, but you just write like this short story in a tweet, and it's v VVS 365, very short story, 365 days.
Okay. And like it's a different short story every day, you mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have a prompt. I
Mm.
looked it up the other day, and I think I saw something that kind of looked like a prompt. It was a basket, the picture of a basket, and there just happened to be a lot of basket themed stories that day. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually a prompt. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you can
Oh,
tell I
I
haven't
love
actually
prom.
done this, but I like the idea.
But there's so much out there to try, though, isn't there? And that was one thing that I was really surprised about, coming back into it. One, how kind the writing community is on Twitter, Instagram and everything, how they really are just trying to help each other up for the most part anyway. And how much is going on there.
Mm-hmm. I
There's
know,
so
yeah,
much.
yeah, it's
Yeah, it's
great.
like prompts and you know, and I've got to admit, because I was away from that side of things for so long, I didn't realize there was such a large community and such a
Mhm.
supportive community around that. So it's been kind of really refreshing to kind of
That's
step
good.
into that. Mm.
Yeah, I think it's funny how like different writing communities are sort of have a different feeling. Like I was reading something that or listening to a podcast, a journalist was talking about the journalist community on Twitter, and he was
Mm.
saying that, it has its own character. It can be a little bit more competitive sometimes. But I
Yeah.
find the writing communities that I'm sort of a part of, these multiple circles that sort of, define my online life, that they're very friendly. And I think maybe it's a little selection process too. Like I have a certain style of relating and other people have a certain style of relating, and then it's like, oh, okay, you're similar, so you're drawn closer together,
Mm.
and like attracts like, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I've had a really good knock on wood. Where's wood? I need to knock on it.
I know what you mean though. At first, I would say to my other half, I'd be like, oh yeah, Twitter's so friendly, there's such a friendly community. And every time I said it, I thought, am I jinxing myself?
Yes,
What's about to
exactly.
happen?
We've discussed your personal history, and thank you for being so forthcoming. In your personal writing, and you've mentioned Stephen King, are there any other authors who have influenced you? Like which authors would you say have influenced you the most?
I mentioned her earlier, but Ali Brush,
Okay.
there's hyperbole and a half. Um, not probably not a classical author obviously, but I love her style because again it's honest, it's funny, and it's dark at times, but it's still funny, and the darkness doesn't take away from the humor, and I think that's a really hard balance to get sometimes,
Mhm.
because it can come up, it it can very easily come off like you're being flippant about things.
Mhm.
But she
Right.
manages that balance really, really well. That and I just find her hilarious. So she's one person that I really like to read. John Fowles as well. I've not read so much of his stuff recently, but when I was kind of a teenager growing up, my favorite book was The Collector, which is very, very dark. So I would recommend people read it, but not if you're going through a tough time.
Okay.
It's one of those that really drags you in and
Yeah, yeah,
then
I've read
drags you
those
along with
before.
it. Yeah. So yeah, and I think his style, although sometimes he did kind of go up a little bit, he was a bit verbose, you know, and that sort of thing. The way that he wrote some of his books, again, it was that way that he drew you in, and
Mhm,
he kind of, even if you didn't like the character, you felt like you knew the character,
mhm, mhm.
and that's kind of what I really valued there. So I suppose it's that kind of that raw feeling like you can, you know, either connect with the author or you can connect with, you know, what they're selling, the characters that they're building, and that sort of thing.
Do you remember what point of view he wrote in?
John Fowles.
Yeah.
So the collector, which is my favorite, it was pretty amazing actually, because well, I thought it was pretty amazing. I was about 15, 16 when I read it, I think. Because half of the book is from the perspective of the concept of the book, and this isn't a spoiler, but it's about a man who becomes obsessed with a lady, um, and he thinks he falls in love with her, but he basically becomes besotted with her, and so he hatches a plan to capture her
Mhm.
and to keep her for himself. And the whole concept is he's a butterfly collector. So it's like, you know, he treats her like another one of his butterflies, or that's the way he conceptualizes her in his mind. So the first half of the book is from his perspective, you know, him seeing this girl, becoming infatuated with her, you know, planning things out. And the second half is from her perspective. So it's kind of her
Mm.
diaries. Um, and that I thought was really powerful because
Mhm.
you know you kind of you go through the first half of the book, and as resentful as this character is, you don't start to empathize, but I suppose maybe you sympathize in a few ways. You know, he's had a
Mhm.
tough life and this, that, and the other, and then it flips to the other person's perspective, and it's almost kind of your, you know, everything that you've been thinking and all the opinions that you've been forming are turned on their head. So it's really quite clever.
Yeah, did you read as you're speaking, it really reminded me of I don't know how to pronounce her name, Gillian Flynn, like Gone Girl. Did you ever?
I've not read it, and don't kill me, but I have seen the film and I know
No,
it's
I've
different.
seen the film too. I mean, I
Yeah.
thought the film stayed quite close to the book,
Okay.
actually. Yeah, so but the book is such a treat, really.
I'll have to add
Very
it to
well
my
written.
list. Yeah.
And she, if I remember it correctly, and please people correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe she takes the first perspective is the husband. And the
Yeah.
husband opens up and he's talking about his wife and how they met. And then the second one is the wife, and she's talking about the husband, and they have two completely different theories of the world going on. And
Mm.
and she sets up this who's right, like, because one of them is completely bonkers. you know
Yeah.
and you're just
Or
not
maybe
sure
they
which
both are.
one.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a great book, like it's so good. I actually listened to the audiobook the first time, and that
Okay.
was a real treat. But I know what you're saying, which is to say that when you have a book like that, when it's written from different perspectives, I imagine it would be so difficult to pull off. I think it would be difficult for me to pull off. Let's just put it that way. But it's so powerful when it works.
Yeah. I can't imagine me being able to pull it off purely because I feel like I come through so much in my writing. So you'd almost have like one me and then another me. So it wouldn't
Right.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you write, do you find that you like when you write a short story, say, or have you written many short stories, or are you more like tuned into flash fiction?
So I have written quite a few short stories in my time. Just recently, I have been kind of more tuned into the flash fiction and the poems, things, getting myself back into it. But when I was younger, I'd write short stories. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you write a short story, say, do you have your characters, like your main characters, do you draw on your own life experiences? Like, obviously, we're all drawing from who we are. I mean, that's everything that goes
Mm.
into it. But your, let's say, your significant other, or your friends, or your mother, or like, do you draw from these people as you write your characters, as you create them, as they go through the stage of your mind?
Yeah, I think I definitely do, because there have been occasions where I've written something and I thought, oh God, you know, I don't think I could show it to that particular person. And that's not necessarily because I've drawn them in a bad light, or I've written them in a bad light, but just because, what I'll quite often do is I'll take the seed of someone's kind of personality trait and I'll push it a bit. So it's kind of like, oh, you've got, a side to you that is a little bit too soft. So I'll like push it to the absolute degree, to the point where it's believable as well. And I always think, I'd hate for someone to read it and think I was trying to write them, that
Right.
a part of their personality maybe gave me the inspiration, or something they said or did gave me the inspiration for it, but it's not meant to be a carbon copy of them on the page.
Right. Do you think that if you wrote under a pen name, that it would give you more of a sense of freedom because you wouldn't have to worry about anybody seeing themselves in your work?
No, because I've got such a big mouth that I'd have to tell them. Honestly, a pen name would be a waste of time
I
for
do.
me. Yeah. Because I'd be like, everyone, I'm so and so.
Oh, yeah, I'm the same way. I would probably do exactly the same thing. Yeah. Do you think you ever would write under a pen name? Like, has that thought ever crossed your mind, or?
The only reason I think I would write under a pen name, I don't know. I wouldn't rule it out. I really wouldn't rule it out. I suppose if I wanted to write something that was too close to something else in my life, whether that be my professional life or whatever, which, and I do try and keep the kind of corporate me and the writer me separate, in as so far as I can. So I suppose if there was going to ever be kind of any obvious crossover, I would. But again, I don't think I would do that. I would just avoid doing that because
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's two separate lives and never the twain shall meet.
Right.
Ask me again in 5 years' time, and I might go, well,
Yeah, things change. Things are the
yeah,
same until they change, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, so we talked a little bit before about publishing and sending out your work and trying to get your
Mm.
work in front of an audience. And one thing that I think is becoming more and more common these days is self-publishing.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing that?
Yes. All the
I mean,
time.
in a way, this is what we're doing when we put up our blog posts and
Yeah.
we put our stories out there. But obviously, you know what I mean, like on Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, all the time, all the time. And it's something that I do plan to do at some point. I think for me, it's getting the right balance of um, people knowing who I am and knowing my writing, because there's something for, and everyone does it differently. And this is no disrespect to, people that the first thing they do is kind of self-publish. But for me, I think my strategy would be, and I use following in the loosest sense of the term here, but like get a little bit of a following, a few people that are interested in reading my work, so I know that I've got a big enough crowd of people that might be interested in the book, and then I would go for something like,
Right.
self-publishing. And that's not from I would expect it to kind of be a bestseller or anything perspective, but it's more, I think for me, I would need to know my audience a little bit better, and I would
That
need
makes
to,
sense.
yeah,
That makes sense.
to think about what I was going to put out there. Because if you look at my stuff, and I think kind of you referenced this before, I do, there is lots of different subject matter. So I
Mhm.
suppose I would have to make a decision as to whether, am I going to just put all of that out there in terms of this is just a mixed bag, or am I going to focus, and go down one particular route, this is
Right.
satire, or this is, these are a load of horror poems or horror short stories. So
Well, yes, I mean that brings up a very important distinction. We write from ourselves, like from our blood and our bone. But then when we publish, and I think this distinction is starker when you self-publish, but when you publish, that's a business, right?
yeah.
So you're putting something out there that you want people to consume, to buy,
Mm-hmm.
blood and bone, consume. This is going very Catholic. Anyway,
I know, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah.
It's a
And
commodity then, isn't it?
It
Yeah.
is. And that is it's sort of dislocating sometimes when you think about it, because this is your baby, but then no, you have to like just you're on your own, you're there 18, they're pushing them out the door to
Hmm.
college.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a scary thought. And I do get a little bit of that, as you say, even just putting it out on the internet, because you think, well, all and sundry can see that. And even scarier, all and sundry can interpret that however they want to interpret it. And I have no power over that. And that's beautiful and wonderful. But it's also kind of scary sometimes, especially when I've written something and I've thought, well, that could be read in a certain way, and I don't intend it to be. But it's just being really careful, that what you're putting out there isn't open to interpretation in a way that would be hurtful.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think sometimes an author in the foreword or an afterword or something can sort of clarify certain things if the need arises. But actually, you brought up something that I've thought a lot about. That's kind of interesting to me. Maybe nobody else. I don't know. We'll see. But do you think that the author sets the interpretation of the story? Like, so you write something and you clearly intended it to be. I think sometimes we can write things and we don't really intend them one way or another, and that's a gray
Mhm.
area. But let's say that you wrote a story and you had a specific intent, and you communicated that, or at least you feel you did. So would you say that you have the final word on that, on what that means?
So it's interesting. I am really interested in this, and me and my other half talk about it all the time. He's not a
Uh-huh.
writer, and he's not particularly interested in that sort of thing, but he's pretty good for having an opinion on things. So, and his opinion is very firmly that the author sets the meaning and has the final say. I'm very much the other camp.
Okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
what do you think?
So I think that when you put something out there, yes, you have your own, or you may have your own interpretation of it and your own kind of meaning of it. And sometimes that it might be more than one. There might be multiple. You might think, okay, it could be read like this, or it could be read like that. But ultimately, if someone wants to read a poem that I wrote and it was really genuinely just a stupid one about a zombie, and they want to, have that as their life mantra and something that they live by, and, it really reflects something deep for them, who am I to say that they can't take that meaning out of it?
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I do
So,
see what you're saying.
I mean, it depends for what purpose you're asking the question. If you write a completely innocent poem or piece of prose and someone turns around and says that's horrible, that's hate speech, and these are the reasons why, then I think it's totally on the author to turn around and say, well, no, that was not my meaning, and this is my meaning, and that wasn't to be taken from that. But so in that scenario, fine. But I think in a scenario where someone, in a way that doesn't hurt anyone else, wants to interpret it in a different way, I don't see the harm in it. And if that works for them, then I wouldn't want to turn around and go, no, you've got that wrong.
Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, that's basically, I studied a little bit of William Faulkner's work in school. I think that's basically the attitude that like I did a Jungian interpretation of,
Yeah.
I think it was Light in August. This is turning into a confessional. Anyway, but that's basically what he had to say about people doing Jungian interpretations of Late in August. That, well, I mean, I didn't intend it that way, but go nuts. I'm, sure,
Yeah.
because I mean, this is part of the culture that I imbibed. That is, a part of me that has formed me, and it's formed you too. So I'm sure
Mm.
that if this is something that this is a pattern, then I mean, sure, yeah, go for it.
Have you ever had it happen to you? Has anyone ever played that back to you and you've thought, no, that's not how I wrote it? Or,
I've had people ask, like, what were you thinking? Like, when you, what were you
yeah, what were
thinking?
you
No.
thinking?
But no, I mean, like, they were curious, and sometimes they did. I mean, there was one thing that I wrote, and I had, okay, there was this one story and I just shared it with my writing group. And oh yeah, that's another thing I want to ask you about, whether you have a writing group. But I shared it with my writing group, and one of the girls there said, there's only women. All of your characters are women. Like, and so she had this theory about, like, what was going on in the background, and they were all women. I'm like, no, I don't know.
It just happened to be women. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing there. How about you?
um, no, I don't think so. Um, when I share my writing with people, sometimes they'll look at me, well, when they finish looking at me like I've gone mad, they'll be like, so,
Actually, I think that's
what did you mean
probably a
by that?
compliment if they do that.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll have to explain my meaning and they'll kind of go, okay, I get it now. But I've never not yet had someone play something back to me where they've said, oh, it means this, this, and this. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Although I had an absolutely brilliant thing happen on Instagram. I wrote a poem, and it was just a really short poem, a comical one, about someone. It sounds really bad, but someone had lost their granddad, and it was playing with the term "I've lost my granddad," and the ending was that he was hiding in the fridge with the cheese. Really, really stupid, but yeah, it's just kind of bizarre.
Um,
And they interpreted that as sad, and
oh,
I did kind of, I said to them, tell me how you're reading that, because I totally respect it, but I didn't mean it in that way whatsoever. So I don't know if it was just the idea of loss that was coming
mm,
out of it that was,
mm.
but I was, yeah, that was, so I suppose now I'll come to think of it, it has happened. Um, but again, I think sometimes my sense of humor is a bit strange, so maybe it's
Well, I think it's inevitable. People taking things in ways that you hadn't intended is inevitable, because, like,
Mm,
we can't, even though we really try, like, we can't fix our meaning. It's sort of like this
mm,
shifty sort of chameleon, because we can have the words, and the words are strung together in sentences and paragraphs, but it goes into another person's head, and they're going to have their own. Stephen King does this thing. I'm going to just really irritate you with this, always talking about on writing,
no.
but he has this thing where we're going to do some telepathy, you and I, and there's this white rabbit, and I can't remember the number on the rabbit. Let's say a red 6 on the rabbit's forehead, and there's a tablecloth, and there's a cage, and so I can see that, like, and a white rabbit with a number on its forehead in a cage on a tablecloth, and you've got it. You probably have the color of the tablecloth, what the color of the cage, what the cage looks like, how close together, if it's bars, or if it's, like, those
Good type,
squares.
yeah.
Yeah, the particularity of my image is going to be completely different than the particularity of your image, because, of course, right?
Mhm.
And I think that happens all the time.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, like you say, it's all based on our experience and what we've seen before and what associations we make. And like instantly when you said a rabbit with a 6 on its head, I was thinking there's a hat. A magician's pulled it out of his hat. Why? There's no particular reason for me to think that. But that's
Yeah,
because my frame of reference is white rabbit, magician.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Now that we've sorted that out, would you, I think we've kind of touched on this. Would you say you're more of an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an ambivert.
Oh, what's that?
Straight down the middle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, straight down the middle. Um, it depends on the situation.
Hmm.
If the situation and this possibly comes down to the fact that I'm quite I would say I'm quite a people person in that I don't, I suppose people pleaser is one way that you would kind of put it. And it's something that I have to fight against with every fiber of my being sometimes. But if a situation needs an extrovert, I will step in and I
Oh,
will be
okay.
the extrovert most of the time. But I would say that if anything, I'm slightly more on the side of introvert. And I also think it varies throughout your life. So as I said, when I was younger, I was very, very much an introvert.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
Um, and I would say, I mean, the best definition I've ever heard of introvert and extrovert, and I don't know if you kind of subscribe to this, but it's where you draw your energy from.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so I would say that I do draw my energy from myself. So I am, I suppose, more on the side of the introvert. But as I say, I think I'm fairly fluid in that, if you're in a room full of quiet people, um, I'll be the one to, you know.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of
step
the
it up.
same way. Like I took one of those, the personality test, like
Yeah,
the big five, that one. And I
yeah,
came out actually 50 in terms of extroversion and introversion. I was 50, like right in the middle.
yeah. I've done that before as well a couple of times. Yeah, and it's quite funny because you kind of think, well, what does that mean? But I do think it's kind of adaptability a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that makes sense. Like I like the way you described that.
You know, as I've said, it's I'm very much kind of stepping back into this.
Mhm.
So, you know, if we and I'd like to keep in touch if you would, but you know, if you speak to me in a year, it might be, you know, I might be saying completely different things. But I think the heart of it is, I think it's really, really important for me um that I'm able to write. And okay, I'm not able to do it full time
Mhm.
at the moment, but I just think we live in a really, really good time where we can kind of write and we can share our writing and we can get it out there and we can get kind of other people's support and commentary on it. And just kind of on reflection of, you know, what it would have been like trying to do that even kind of 30 years ago would have been so much more difficult, you know, than it
Yeah.
is now.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, totally.
yeah, just I just think it's fantastic. And you know, the fact that you were able to reach out on Twitter and you know, we were able to have this conversation, I just think that makes it so much easier for
Mhm.
people to kind of um build themselves and build their own style and you
Mhm.
know, have fun with their writing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think like art, when it's a process. Art is exploration, not decoration. Like it's something, and writing is art. Like it's
Hmm.
what we do to explore, ourselves, and then try to make it marketable.
Yes.
uh, okay, so I have my last question. It's always the same question. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, and you could give your younger self one writing tip, what would you say?
Stop taking yourself so seriously. Calm down. Stop
Yeah.
putting so much pressure on yourself. Um, yeah, I mean, and I think I would say that not just about writing, but about everything in life. It's life's about having fun, and writing's about having fun, you know. And if you're not having fun, then you're not doing it right. And
Mhm.
I mean that about everything, you know. And I think when I look back and when I read the writing that I did when I was younger, again, it's so kind of trying to perform, trying to show off, taking myself so seriously, um, and it just makes me giggle now. And
Yeah.
you know, I hope that in 10 years' time, I don't look back at the me now and think, oh God, you were still doing it. And I'm sure you know that you always kick yourself about a couple of things, but yeah, I think that's the advice that I would give myself. Just chill out. It's fine. It's going to be fine.
Good advice. I like that. Maybe I'll try to take that.
I can take it some days and other days not so much. But
Well, thank you very much. And please keep in touch.